Tonight, 28 police officers arrested, accused of protecting a $50 million fentanyl operation.
A 12-year-old girl named Brianna Okafor collapsed in the hallway of her middle school in North Minneapolis. Her lips were blue. Her breathing had stopped. A gym teacher named Dale Herrick found her, administered Narcan from the emergency kit the school district had only recently mandated, and kept her alive until paramedics arrived. Brianna survived. She told investigators later that she had taken what she thought was a Percocet, given to her by an older boy on the bus. Lab results confirmed the pill was counterfeit, pressed fentanyl, stamped to look pharmaceutical, carrying enough synthetic opioid to kill 3 adults. That pill would become Exhibit 1A in what federal prosecutors would eventually call the largest narcotics corruption case in the history of the state of Minnesota. But this story doesn't begin with Brianna. Not really. It begins 18 months earlier in a rented warehouse on East Lake Street, where a man who called himself the pharmacist was building something no one in Minneapolis law enforcement imagined could exist in their city. His real name, or at least the name on his driver's license, was Mateo Ibarra Klein. 38 years old, born in Guadalajara, raised partly in Milwaukee, educated at a community college in Arizona where he studied, of all things, dental hygiene. He never practiced. He had other ambitions. Ibarra Klein understood something about the American drug market that many of his competitors did not. The Midwest was not saturated. The coasts had their supply chains locked down, their turf wars settled or simmering. But Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Des Moines, Omaha, these cities were wide open. Growing populations, expanding demand, and law enforcement apparatuses built to handle property crime and domestic violence, not cartel-level narcotics distribution. By the time federal agents became aware of his network, Ibarra Klein had constructed a fentanyl distribution operation generating an estimated $50 million annually. He had 43 direct employees. He had 6 pill presses running in 3 locations across the Twin Cities metro area. And he had something far more valuable than any of them: 28 law enforcement officers on his payroll. The investigation that would unravel all of it started, as so many do, with a phone call nobody expected. In July, 17 months before the raids, a DEA field agent named Carla Vasquez received a voicemail on her personal cell phone. The caller identified himself only as someone who's tired of watching people die. The voice was male, strained, and clearly disguised through some kind of modulator. He said that fentanyl pills were being manufactured inside Minneapolis city limits, that the operation was protected by local police, and that if the DEA wanted proof, they should look into why 3 specific addresses on East Lake Street had never once been subject to a patrol stop, a code inspection, or a noise complaint response. Despite neighbors calling repeatedly, Vasquez almost deleted it. She received crank call. Everyone in the field office did, but something about the specificity nagged at her. 3 addresses, that was a verifiable claim. So she checked. The caller was right. All 3 properties had active 911 complaint histories. Noise, chemical smells, suspicious vehicle traffic, and in every single case, the complaints had been logged, assigned, and then closed without action. The case disposition codes varied: unable to locate, no violation observed, complainant unavailable. But the pattern was unmistakable. Someone inside the Minneapolis Police Department was intercepting these complaints and burying them. Vasquez brought the findings to her supervisor, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Tom Reinhardt, and he made a decision that would define the entire operation. They would not notify local law enforcement, not the Minneapolis PD, not the Hennepin County Sheriff, not even the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. If cops were compromised, the investigation would be built in a sealed room, and only federal hands would touch it. They called it Operation Glass House. The name was Vasquez's idea because everyone inside was exposed, whether they knew it or not. For the first 3 months, the investigation was pure surveillance. FBI counterintelligence agents, borrowed from the Domestic Terrorism Division because Reinhardt trusted them to keep secret, set up observation posts near the 3 Lake Street addresses. They documented vehicle plates, photographed visitors, and mapped movement patterns. What emerged was a logistics operation of startling discipline. Deliveries arrived in commercial vehicle, plumbing vans, catering trucks, a vehicle painted with the logo of a carpet cleaning company that did not exist. Departures happened on a precise schedule. Tuesday and Friday evening, always between 8 and 10 p.m., always using different routes. But the breakthrough came from technology, not binoculars. An FBI cyber forensics team, working out of the Bureau's Minneapolis field office, obtained a warrant to deploy a Stingray device, a cell site simulator that could intercept phone communications in the vicinity of the warehouses. What they captured stunned them. Over a period of 6 weeks, they logged more than 1,400 calls and text messages between phones inside the warehouses and phones registered to active-duty Minneapolis police officers, Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies, and, most alarmingly, 2 members of the Minnesota division of the DEA's own task force. Let that settle for a moment. 2 people inside the very agency investigating drug trafficking were communicating regularly with the people manufacturing fentanyl. Now, the investigation now had to account for the possibility that its own house was compromised. Reinhart made a second critical decision. He escalated directly to Washington. Within a week, a team from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit arrived in Minneapolis, operating undercover as auditors from the Department of Justice Inspector General's office. Their mission: identify every compromised officer and build prosecutable cases against them without triggering a single alarm. What they found over the next 4 months was a corruption network that operated less like bribery and more like a parallel employment structure. Ibarra Klein didn't simply pay officers to look the other way. He hired them. They had roles. Some were lookouts, assigned to monitor police radio channels and warn of any approaching units not under his control. And others handled evidence. When small-time dealers in the network were arrested by officers outside the ring, compromised cops would ensure evidence was mishandled, chain of custody forms were improperly filed, or lab results were delayed until cases fell apart. A sergeant in the 4th Precinct, a man named Darren Hobeck, allegedly functioned as a recruiter, identifying officers with financial problems, gambling debts, or personal vulnerabilities, and introducing them to what he described as consulting work. The payments were sophisticated, no cash handoffs in parking garages. Ibarra Klein's financial architect, a woman named Sungli Park, a former commercial banker, had established a network of 11 shell companies registered in Wyoming and New Mexico. Officers received payments as consulting fee, equipment rental income, or training stipend, all processed through legitimate-looking invoicing software and deposited into secondary bank accounts. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division, brought into the operation in its 5th month, traced more than $6 million in payments to law enforcement personnel over a 3-year period. And during all of this, the fentanyl kept flowing. Minneapolis had already been experiencing a surge in overdose deaths. Between the start of the investigation and the eventual raids, Hennepin County recorded 412 fatal opioid overdoses. Medical examiners found that more than 80% involved fentanyl. Emergency rooms across the metro were administering Narcan at rates that dwarfed previous years. Homeless encampments along Hiawatha Avenue became open-air drug markets where Ibarra Klein's counterfeit pills sold for $5 each. A schoolteacher in Brooklyn Park found a bag of them in a 7th grader's locker. A paramedic in Richfield told a local news crew, off the record, that she had started carrying extra Narcan in her personal vehicle because she kept encountering overdoses on her days off. The human cost was stacking up like cordwood, and the people sworn to stop it were being paid to let it happen. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that even the investigators didn't anticipate. In month 9 of Operation Glasshouse, the FBI's wiretaps captured a conversation between Ibarra Klein and a man speaking from a phone geolocated to Culiacan, Mexico. The conversation was brief, conducted partly in coded language. But analysts identified the voice as belonging to a mid-level logistics coordinator for the Sinaloa Cartel. The call confirmed what investigators had suspected but couldn't prove. Ibarra Klein was not independent. He was a franchise operator. The Sinaloa Cartel had effectively licensed his territory, supplying him with precursor chemicals sourced from Chinese manufacturers, shipped through Mexican ports, and transported overland through a network of tunnels and vehicle compartments into the American Southwest before being redirected to the upper Midwest. Minneapolis was not a standalone operation. It was a node in a continental supply chain. This revelation changed the scope of everything, and Reinhart convened a multi-agency task force under the umbrella of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, OCDETF, bringing together the FBI, DEA headquarters elements cleared at the highest level, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, the IRS, and the U.S. Marshal Service. The investigation was assigned a federal grand jury in the District of Minnesota, and prosecutors began preparing a sweeping RICO indictment. But building the case required one more piece, someone on the inside willing to talk. They found her in an unlikely place, a 26-year-old woman named Jessica Tron, who worked as a bookkeeper for one of Sungli Park's shell company. Tron had no criminal record. She had a degree in accounting from St. Cloud State. She had taken the job because it paid well, and she was drowning in student debt. By the time she realized what the company actually did, she told agents she felt trapped. She was afraid of Ibarra Klein. She was afraid of the police officers she had seen visiting the office, and she was afraid that no one would believe her. When FBI agents approached Tron at a coffee shop in Uptown, carefully, gently, with a female agent leading the conversation, she cried for 20 minutes before saying a word. Then she talked for 6 hours. She provided account numbers, transaction records, and the names of every officer she had personally processed payments for. She identified Sergeant Hobeck. She identified the 2 compromised DEA task force members, and she provided a detail that prosecutors would later call the linchpin of the entire case. Ibarra Klein kept a personal ledger, handwritten in a safe at his residence in Edina. On that ledger, Tron said, contained everything, every payment, every name, every date. The raids were planned for a Thursday in January, chosen because intelligence indicated that Ibarra Klein would be at his Edina home, that the pill presses would be running at full capacity at the Lake Street facilities, and that the compromised officers would be on shift and could be arrested simultaneously to prevent any from warning the others. Operation Glass House deployed more than 300 federal agents on the morning of the raids. FBI SWAT teams hit 6 locations across the metro. ICE Homeland Security Investigations teams executed search warrants on the shell company offices. IRS agents seized financial records from 3 banks. And U.S. Marshals, working from sealed arrest warrants, had fanned out across Minneapolis and its suburbs to take 28 law enforcement officers into custody. The breach at the Edina residence happened at 5:47 a.m. Ibarra Klein was asleep. He offered no resistance. Agents found the safe exactly where Tron said it would, bolted to the floor of a basement closet behind a rack of winter coats. Inside, alongside $43,000 in cash and 2 unregistered handguns, was the ledger, 87 pages, handwritten in blue ink, with entries dating back. At the Lake Street warehouses, agents discovered 6 industrial pill presses, more than 2 million counterfeit fentanyl pills ready for distribution, 11 kilograms of raw fentanyl powder, and packaging materials designed to mimic pharmaceutical branding from 8 different prescription medications. The combined street value of the seized narcotics exceeded $30 million. A hazmat team had to be called in because the fentanyl concentration in the air of one facility was high enough to cause symptoms in agents wearing standard protective equipment. Across the city, the arrest of the 28 officers unfolded with surreal precision. Some were taken from their squad cars, others were arrested at their homes, in front of their family. Sergeant Hobeck was apprehended at a gas station on Nicollet Avenue, still in uniform, his service weapon holstered, a look on his face that one arresting agent later described as not surprise, resignation, like he'd been waiting for. The 2 compromised DEA task force members were arrested at the federal building itself. They were escorted out in handcuffs past colleagues who had no idea what was happening. In total, 407 individuals were arrested over a 72-hour period in connection with Operation Glass House. The charges ranged from drug trafficking and money laundering to official corruption, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. 43 defendants faced mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years or more. Ibarra Klein was charged under the federal RICO statute with leading a continuing criminal enterprise, a charge carrying a potential life sentence. And yet, in the aftermath, the most difficult conversation was not about the criminal, it was about the city. Minneapolis had to reckon with the fact that its own protectors had been complicit in an operation that had killed hundreds of its residents. The interim police chief, a career officer named Sandra Veltri, who had not been implicated, held a press conference in which she described the corruption as a betrayal so fundamental that it challenges the meaning of the badge itself. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office announced a review of more than 3,000 criminal cases handled by the compromised officers, because any arrest they had made, any testimony they had given, any evidence they had touched was now suspect. Defense attorneys filed motions for case dismissals. Convictions were vacated. People who had been sent to prison based on the word of officers who were simultaneously working for a fentanyl manufacturer had their sentences thrown out. The ripple effects reached beyond the courtroom. Community organizations that had spent years trying to build trust between law enforcement and Minneapolis neighborhoods, particularly communities of color already scarred by previous policing controversies, found their work devastated. How do you ask a community to trust the police when 28 of them were working for a cartel? Jessica Tron entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. Her testimony, combined with the ledger and the financial record, formed the backbone of the prosecution. Sung Lee Park pleaded guilty and cooperated with authorities. authorities, providing detailed testimony about the financial architecture. Ibarra Klein, of the indictment, maintained his innocence, though the evidence assembled against him filled more than 40,000 pages of discovery documents. And somewhere in Washington, intelligence analysts added a new pin to the map tracking the Sinaloa cartel's American distribution network, Minneapolis, a city of lakes, of theater, of bitter winters, and stubborn optimism. Now also a city that had learned what it looks like when the people you trust to hold the line are the ones who erased it. This story is fiction, but the forces it depicts, the infiltration of American law enforcement by cartel money, the devastation of fentanyl in communities that never expected it, the quiet courage of people like a bookkeeper in Uptown who decided that fear was not a good enough reason to stay silent. Those forces are real, and they are ongoing. If this narrative made you think, made you angry, or made you want to understand more about what is actually happening in American cities right now, share it. Talk about it. Now, the greatest advantage any criminal operation has is the silence of people who suspect but say nothing. And if you're wondering how deep it really goes in the city nearest you, honestly, so are the people whose job it is to find out. This has been a fictional dramatization. All characters and specific events depicted are products of creative storytelling. The issues explored, fentanyl trafficking, law enforcement corruption, and cartel infiltration of American institutions, are inspired by publicly reported trends and are presented here for educational and entertainment purposes.